Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast, brought to you by Mayo Clinic. I'm your host, Dr. Andrea Tooley.
And I'm Dr. Eric Bothan. We're here to bring you the latest and greatest in ophthalmology, medicine, and more. Today on the podcast, we will be sitting down with Dr. Mark Humayun to talk about his remarkable career in developing the Argus II artificial retina.
Today, Dr. Eric Bothan and I have the privilege of speaking with one of the most visionary innovators in our field, Dr. Mark Humayun. Dr. Humayun is Professor of Ophthalmology, Biomedical Engineering, and Stem Cell Biology at the University of Southern California. He's the Cornelius Pings Chair in Biomedical Sciences, Director of the USC Ginsberg Institute for Biomedical Therapeutics, and co-director of the USC Roski Eye Institute. He's perhaps known for leading the development of the Argus II, the first FDA-approved artificial retina, and for receiving the National Medal of Technology and Innovation from President Obama. He holds more than 150 patents and has over 13,000 citations to his work. Mark, welcome. It's truly an honor to have you with us.
Great to be here with you.
We've enjoyed today having you be with us here at Mayo and just learning a little bit about your story. I certainly appreciate that you are well known for these high impact innovations and career or field advancing research. But for our listeners that are out there in the ophthalmology sphere, just back up with us if you could and start at the beginning on what brought your interest into medicine and specifically ophthalmology that started this journey for you.
Well, it was a very personal story that got me into ophthalmology. My grandmother, who helped raise me, was suffering from diabetes and ended up having blindness from diabetic retinopathy. And if you wind back the clock, at that time, we didn't really even understand the role of laser for diabetic retinopathy. So, that was very frustrating. I would go with her to the top institutions, and we wouldn't get the answer that we were looking for. So it made me really concentrate and focus on ophthalmology, and particularly how to treat patients with difficult retinal problems.
It's striking to me how many people have stories similarly of an individual close to them that were impacted with vision issues and how it shaped their career in healthcare. So thank you for sharing.
Now, Mark, you have a unique background in both medicine and engineering. Was that always part of the plan, or did that evolve over time?
Well, it certainly wasn't part of the plan. I wanted to be an ophthalmologist after seeing what happened with my grandmother, and I wanted to develop some ways to help the blind, but I was doing everything possible not to have to do engineering because I was adept at taking math and I'd taken a certain amount of physics, but I hadn't done a lot of the engineering courses. And so, but unfortunately, somebody had to be an engineer out of that group. I still remember that. And so everybody looked at me and said, well, you have to do it. And so, but now, fortunately, all joking aside, it was really a fun thing. I loved engineering, went back on my PhD. During my residency, it was kind of an intriguing and interesting and chaotic time. But it was focused very much on making the retinal implant. So engineering definitely wasn't in the cards or in the plan out of the gate, but it was something that was a necessity and something that has served me very well thereafter.
So did you start engineering, then medical training, and then back to do a PhD, or was engineering after the medical journey? Just share that up there and understanding.
It's quite a unique and strange path, and it's definitely not a straightforward path at all. It's quite circuitous. So I changed my field of interest. I was interested in neurosurgery, so went back into ophthalmology. And so by the time I had made that switch, we were towards the end of medical school. So the only way to do this was to take a year off, do the classes, as many of those classes as possible, and then do the remainder of the classes and the research during residency. So it was a PhD done during residency.
I appreciate that. So many people have different backgrounds in science and find their way to medicine. I started in engineering and switched over to medicine and didn't look back. I very much appreciate now when we look at your field of work, how complementary it has been for you to marry these two expertise and passions that you have. Were there you spoke to even early on, retinal research or innovation was part of that. Were there key experiences or mentors that helped to see for you to show you how you could marry medicine and engineering and share that story?
Well, mentors are key, and as all of us know, and in this particular track, there really wasn't a surgeon engineer, but there were some very key figures that were as close as possible to that kind of thinking. And so Dr. Machmer, who invented vitrectomy, was one, and he basically was very interested in advancing the field through technology and technological breakthroughs. He developed the vitrector, and so he was always very supportive. Another person who was also very supportive during this time was Jean Dewan. He was a young retina faculty then. Nobody really wanted to work with him. Everybody wanted to work with the Professor Machmer. But I found space in his laboratory, and he allowed me to do basically whatever I wanted to in his laboratory. He had a cell culture laboratory. It wasn't anything engineering, but we could use the resources. And then the continuous encouragement and guidance from Dr. Machmer, I think it was the combination of that really led to helping me get through some tough and rocky times when things weren't going so well.
That's great. So moving on to the Argus 2, that was a true moonshot project where you assembled the engineers, clinicians, and regulators to build an artificial retinal implant. So can you walk us through the origin story of the Argus 2 and really what kept you going through setbacks, which I'm sure are inevitable?
Yeah, I mean, the Argus 2, is my lifelong dedication. It's we started with almost really nothing, and everybody thought we were absolutely crazy to put a computer chip into the eye and on the retina and have it take images from a camera and make a blind person see. I mean, it just sounded like science fiction, and it pretty much was at that time, and we had to make it science fact. And the things that really helped during those times was, I guess, just having such a naivety and just the willingness to make it happen, and just the freedom to do it, and being young enough and not seeing any obstacles, not knowing any better. It was all those great things that made it possible. And the wonderful support of the mentors I mentioned, and the engineering folks that I talked to, they were just as equally enamored by the concept. So everybody was super excited about it, and so it kept you going. But there were many times where there wasn't any book, there wasn't anybody to talk to. You just didn't know how to take the next step. And those are places that really teach you a lot about yourself, teach you a lot about your team, teach you a lot about your fortitude, your perseverance. But yeah, they were just great times, and there were so many, from understanding the software code and how to stimulate the retina, from making the electronic device not burn or destroy the retina, from the body fluids not to completely corrode and damage the device. So, and last but not least, how do you surgically implant this? So, gosh, I mean, those are just a few, but there were so many of those challenges.
Along the way, you carried I appreciate the balance of a clinician scientist. You maintained a clinician practice. What kind of volume, what was your life like when you look back? Has it been a 50-50 mix, or how have you juggled this huge impact in the lab and translational research with a clinician practice?
Well, at first it was really 90% clinic. It was because you get out and you really want to practice what you've trained so long for after fellowship. All the fellows and residents know you. So they give you all the surgeries, and you're not saying no, and you're operating, and you're seeing a lot of patients. And during that time, we were working on this particular procedure called macular translocation for macular degeneration, something we don't practice now, but and we were one of the few centers doing it. So it'd be 10 surgeries a week of vitrectomy, and then you would have 10 post-ops and then 10 pre-ops. So the clinics were just growing, and so only had 1 day of research, and 1 out of the 5 working days, and then there was the weekend of research. So it was just something that was so busy, and I was trying to find time to do more research. And so slowly I got grants to release me from the clinic, buy me some release time, and that went to then 60% clinic, slowly went to 50% clinic, and now it's more like 30% clinic for me. So over time it has shifted
Evolved.
more towards research.
And just because I'm not the retina, I did enjoy managing the strabismus torsional aspects of macular translocation as a strabismus person. But being that I'm not a retina person, and knowing that our listeners have probably all heard of the Argus II, but can just frame in timeline when that hit, when that's the larger study rolled out, and how many patients around the world have received the Argus II to date?
Well, the study started around mid 2000, like 2007 thereabouts. We were doing the clinical trials. We got FDA approval around 2013. And after that, the European approval shortly thereafter. There've been 15, 16 countries now that have it approved, and it's been implanted in more than 400 subjects around the world. And some of those devices continue to work now, even after 20 years. We had one patient who had bilateral implants, and it was very interesting. One was an earlier generation prototype called the Argus I, which only had 16 electrodes, and then the Argus II, which had 60. So he could really give us the comparison between one implant and the other implant. Was very, very helpful for us to develop this latest generation of device, which is not an Argus series because it's being done by another company, but it's called the IMIE 256. It's a 256 electrode device. So that idea of how 16 versus 60 work really enabled us to come up with the higher density 256 electrode device.
Well, it was remarkable. And again, I shared as a non-retina specialist this morning, even hearing about where the fields continue to go, both in biomechanical implantation, but also other media in terms of RPE replacement, and just the future of vision research in these remarkable ways. It just was exciting to hear your talk this morning. So it's fun to share it here in the venue too.
And you've received numerous awards for your work, from the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, the IEEE medals, Charles Scapen Award, and that's just a few. Which of these do you think meant the most to you, and why?
That's an interesting question. I think obviously the most impactful that everyone recognizes and realizes is the Presidential Medal for Innovation and Technology. It was quite mind-boggling why they'd selected me, because previous winners are like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and so household names. So you look at the previous recipients of these awards and you start to wonder, did they make a mistake of some sort? But
After hearing
Too humble.
yeah, but it was really very meaningful to meet the president. You get to speak with him in person in the Blue Room, and the whole ceremony, very, very impactful. And President Obama had selected 2 stories to highlight of all the medal winners, and one of them was about the vision restoration program that we had done. So it really did. It was an amazing ceremony, amazing to meet the president, tell him a little bit about eye disease, and get the award. But some of these other ones, I just, they're meaningful because the Scapins, because they're from your colleagues, and your colleagues really know your work. And so it's really very gratifying to have your colleagues give you those sorts of awards and recognition. So I would say, there are different levels of joy from these awards, and they're all great.
And it was certainly the highlights are just astounding to appreciate the contributions you had. Earlier, you made a comment about, I can't remember if the term was rocky periods, whether in people's clinical practice or in the lab, and certainly, you've been, through that journey of bench to bedside in a way that many people aspire to, but it's hard to accomplish. Share with us just sort of one sort of encouragement or what sort of perspective. You said you learn about yourself, but it's a very difficult leap to make for people. And a lot of times, whether because of funding or burnout or just a lack of vision, they stop marching in some of these directions. And just, can you share just any advice or perspective for listeners in the midst of, maybe it's managing a practice right now that seems to be falling apart if they're in private practice, but share just when you look back at those rocky periods, what do you appreciate and what would you say to a listener experiencing right now in their clinical practice or academic efforts?
Yeah, I mean, we all hit these rough patches, whether it's in a translational research program or, taking care of patients, and the thing that really helped me at the end of the day is when you go into that room, you see that patient that is either going blind or has gone blind, and there's no stronger motivation. And therefore, I've never, everybody said, look, you could get so much more done if you just play in one major league. Don't play in the NFL and the NBA. Don't be, in the lab and the clinic. But for me, for example, if I gave up the entire clinic and never saw patients again, I would lose that, that sort of impetus to do and to do it quickly and to do it right, safely, effectively. So it's the patient at the end of the day. When you walk in, it sort of tells you where your true north is, and you really do want to do that and follow it. So that's what I would say has worked for me.
What's your advice for listeners who may be clinician scientists, who are considering a career in innovation or have a passion to innovate something but don't quite know how to start?
Yeah, that's interesting. We all have great ideas, and when I go around the country, I always run into people who have pulled me aside and I have a great idea to share with you, and they are really great ideas. And they're frustrated because they don't know what to do with them. I think that we all have great ideas. We have to have the time. That's the thing. If you're running around, you don't have any time, it's hard to come up with ideas. You're just tired. So I think you need to give yourself a break, give yourself time. These ideas don't come up. You can't engineer them. You can't say they're going to come up here or there or what they're going to be about. You let them come up sort of in an unstructured manner. And then you support them. I think that's, you have to believe in it and support it. So at the end, it's believing in your idea, let them coming up when they do come up, and then really persevering to make them happen. I mean, that last part is so difficult because there's so many challenges to take these ideas and make them happen. So if you really truly believe in something, it's a gut check. How much do you love that idea and how much do you want to make it happen? Because then you have to do the heavy lifting and put in the effort.
Just before this, it was lunchtime, and I was walking from my office, and the door was open to our conference room. And it's like so many visiting professors in different institutions have the opportunity to do, it's spending time with the residents and reflecting on career for new trainees. Be curious, either if you were talking to yourself as a medical student right now, looking back at your life, or an early career physician, or something from them, because certainly there are definitely trainees and on the ophthalmology field listening. Anything about the hour that you just shared with them, or about your own looking back at yourself you'd encourage or like to share?
Well, there were a lot of great questions, but I would say I think the one that I really enjoyed is they asked, what is the one thing that sort of has worked for me consistently through the years? And I sort of gave them an answer that probably made them scratch their head, and it's not very obvious, is to be unstructured, and and then not to be in a rush. So basically, and also to be a little bit irreverent of what we know. So meaning that, if you're very structured and you do things in certain time frames, certain times a lot of these activities end up taking twice, 3 or 4 times as long. And if you're very structured, you won't allow that time because you have to move on to the other thing that you've planned. So sometimes, these things could take up a whole day, a whole week, maybe a month, and you have to not do some of the other things. The other thing was to have a slow internal time clock, so not be in a rush. That I'm going to be at 35 here, at 40 this, and 45 here. You just, when you're doing this type of work, you got to have a slow internal time clock. That's what Dr. Markimer told me. And the last one was to be a little bit irreverent, because if you really believe everything around you, you're not going to be able to innovate something truly radical. So take what you do know, and obviously things that are working very well, don't break them. But there are things that are not working very well, and so you don't have to do, the way things are being done. Try to change it. Try to make them better.
Fantastic ideas, and definitely, everybody should be encouraged to challenge the dogma in one way or another, because not everything we do is necessarily the best way or evidence-based even. Dr. Humayun, thank you very much for joining us today. I mean, your journey is a true inspiration to scientists and others who want to make a difference in science and patient care. So we're really grateful for your visit today.
Yeah, I just excited about all the messages and what is, kind of dream big about what's possible in vision care, and just to seeing the footprints that you've made and your labs have made in our field is remarkable, and look forward to the next ones as we all share in this effort together.
Well, thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast for more conversations with leaders shaping the future of eye care.
You can find all episodes of the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast on our website.
Thank you for listening, and we definitely look forward to sharing more